Hey my tech friends, thanks for stopping by. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's continue to grow this channel. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Hey guys, welcome to another homebrew system. Today we're going to look at ReviOS, or REVIOS. I want to point out that this particular build is not a build based off of Playbook, which is a configuration tool that likely won't be used on this channel until I get some hardware that is not anywhere, that sits even outside of my firewall. We can go into more details why that is through this video, but for the sake of this video, this is ReviOS, or ReviOS, that was released as the last ISO version before they switched to the Playbook version. So in this video, I'm going to continue on through the process like we've done in the past, where we're going to do the installation of the Windows operating system and try to capture just specifically the differences between this operating system and just your basic Windows 11 configuration. So far, this is where we start off with the acceptance of the actual license. So we're going to accept the license and continue. Now keep in mind, even though this is ReviOS, in a lot of the other homebrew operating systems, we don't get this alert or warning that we need 52 gigs of drive space in order to install the operating system. So let's test to see if this will actually install or if we'll have to expand the drive. So far the installation is pretty standard, Windows 11 configuration, so let's reboot the system and continue on. Okay, so we rebooted the system and it's coming back up. So far it's all been pretty standard. I don't see any differences so far in the configuration as far as a boot process. But then I understand that this is configured originally for Playbook, so it's possible that it's completely vanilla until we actually get into the operating system. So once again, now we're in the Windows 11 configuration. This all looks pretty standard, so for the most part, I probably am just going to click through these things through my configuration, and we'll pick this video back up at the next section of the config. Okay, so the system rebooted and it came back up, and this is the first screen that's different. We see the configuration now running in the background, which looks like it is setting us up for ReviOS. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing this correctly. If I'm not, please let me know how it's supposed to be pronounced in the comment section. But yeah, so far, it's just a basic Windows 11 installation process. And then we get to the point here where we're going through a scripted configuration, much like we had in our integral system during the installation process. Okay, so this is the first sign of the operating system coming up. Let's take a look real quick and see what this looks like. And I apologize for the screen size. We'll get the VMware tools here installed in a second so we can get full screen. Okay, so outside of maybe just a desktop background and the fact that we have Brave installed so far, at least from the boot process, the operating system doesn't look too much different than what you would get out of the box with Windows 11. Okay, so before we go any further with this, let's get VMware tools installed on this particular machine so we could get full screen. Okay, so we just rebooted after we installed our VMware tools. Let's log into this thing. Now, the one thing I will say about this ReviOS, now maybe it's just because I didn't do the traditional process where I went through the Playbook installation, but this particular OS so far, out of all the other Windows 11 and Windows 10 homebrews that we've worked on, is the slowest. It has the most resources allocated to it, and it's the slowest version of all of them, including our vanilla out-of-the-box Windows 11 configuration. So I do notice that it just feels real laggy. But let's continue on to take a look at it, see specifically what it is that we're running. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to take a look at is to see what this actually is. So I'm going to go to System to see what build version this is. All right, so it's 22H2. So it's the previous, I think we're on 23H2 now in Windows 11, so it's the previous build. So it's still supported, so it's just the older build number. And based off of the latency and stuff like that, I don't think that that's going to cause us any issue. This isn't the release client. This is the one in between what we currently have and the original release of Windows 11. So let's take a look specifically on the system here to see how big it is. What size is this actual operating system? So the OS itself isn't entirely too large. It's 11.5 gigs in size, which is, I mean, for Windows 11 is not terrible. That said, it's not as small as our Ghost system was, or our Rectify 11. Both of those systems were smaller than this as far as their footprint was concerned. They were also both faster than this. This, like I said, feels laggy to me. Let's take a look at some more configuration on this system. Let's specifically look to see what packages we have installed. So let's go to our control panel. So we don't have as pretty of a look in here as we did in the other operating systems. Honestly, the theme packages and all that other stuff, so far Ghost's operating system, the Ghost Spectre operating systems, seem to be the most pretty. They're the most beautiful ones as far as like the look is concerned. They have much nicer icons. Their theme packs are nicer put together. It's more smooth. Things look better blended together. So far, I would say out of all of them, that seems to be my favorite package is the Ghost operating system. Now, I'm not saying the X-Lite isn't a good runner-up. That also is nice. It's just it's a little busy on the installation, whereas the Ghost wasn't like that. But that said, let's take a look at the program list on this particular system to see if there's anything installed on here. So it looks like we have Brave, the browser, installed, which that's good or bad. It is what it is. We have the revision tool. We have the VMware tools that I installed, and then we have Microsoft's Visual C++ 2015-22 redistributable, which is probably needed for this revision tool. So let's take a look now to see if there's any features that are specifically added to the system. Interesting. Okay, so we have direct play turned on. So we don't have SMB Direct turned on, so we're not supporting SMB3 file shares, which is bizarre because you would think in a later operating system that's something you would want enabled. So it looks like we have a couple things removed, but I'm not really sure why you would do that other than to make things more annoying or aggravating when you're going through the file share process with Windows 11. Which, by the way, is already annoying and aggravated to begin with. Let's continue on and look at the additional service structure on this system to see what else is running. And then let's drill into this revision tool to see what specifically it does. So I was thinking just to follow suit in the previous systems we've checked, let's now first check out the Windows firewall. So we'll dip back here, we'll go to our small icons, we'll choose the Windows Defender firewall. Now you'll note that it is turned on for private, guest, and public, so that's good news. Let's go into the actual app list here and see specifically what we have configured. So the first thing I noticed in here is we have captive portal flow enabled on both the public and the private network. So what this does is this is the service that allows your Windows client machine to communicate with like a hotel chain. Like if you've ever been to a hotel and you click on something to go to the internet, you get redirected to that web page that says that you have to agree to the terms and service. That's what this does, is it allows like Microsoft Outlook to redirect, to pop up to say that you have to agree to the terms and services. Because generally speaking, if you're not using a web browser, you try to go somewhere, it'll get blocked and you don't know why. That's what this service does, is it allows you to redirect every application that needs an internet access through a captive flow portal that basically says that you're allowed to connect with that particular piece of software. Honestly, it's generally speaking, I would say it's not necessary to be there. Anybody that goes to a hotel at this point knows that they have to specifically go to a web portal first to open it up in your browser. Now, I suspect it's there because Brave likely has the Brave configuration, the shield, enabled by default. And if you go to those sites and that redirect tries to kick you off, it'll probably prevent you from getting to the page. And since it looks like we don't have Microsoft Edge installed on this machine, that's likely why this actual service is here on this particular system. Let's take a look at the rest of the services that we have running on this particular machine. As I'm going through this, I'll be honest with you, the majority of the stuff on here indicates, the way it looks anyways, it looks like it's configured for this machine to be specifically a media center machine and not necessarily a gaming platform like we would find in like our Ghost Spectre systems. I would say that this system's probably more geared towards media center type of configuration. mostly because of the bizarre configurations we have out of the box, specifically with our Xbox game stuff. Most of the time, most people are going to disable this stuff, but it exists on this thing. So that tells me that likely this system would have been geared more towards somebody that needed to use it for media center purposes. All right, so let's take another look. Let's get out of the firewall configuration real quick. And let's take a look at this revisions tool. Let's see what this specifically does. So what I'm first going to do, I'm going to right-click on this thing and go to Properties, because I'm curious where we're going. I'm going to open the file location. I'm going to specifically look to see if we have a config file in here, maybe an INI file that we could drill into. Don't. Okay. All right, let's run it and see what it actually does. All right, let's double-click on it and see what happens here. So it looks like it's just a front-end configuration tool for our built-in configuration. Which I'm going to tell you, so as somebody that does security and infrastructure for a living or for a long time, the vast majority of these tools become pretty worthless. Because most of these configurations are really easily done through a group policy configuration, which at this point, after you work on these operating systems for long enough, all of these settings are easily tweaked from a centralized location that makes this pretty much useless. But that said, the question is from a generic, or not necessarily a generic, but a basic end user, somebody that doesn't necessarily know the menu system in the Windows operating system, does this pose any reason to use? And to me, I don't think it does any good. And the specific reason behind that is because now putting this system here, this tool that gives you the access to these things, doesn't allow the end user to learn where these access controls exist in the operating system. So if they're going to start off with, say, Windows 11, when Windows 11 was released, and they're going to work on it for the next, say 10 years, this operating system's option, this Revi tool, doesn't exist in every single version of Windows 11. But if we right-click on the Start menu and we go to Settings, this Settings menu will exist on every single version of Windows 11. So giving somebody these additional tools to control things that already exist inside the Settings menu generally cause more of an issue for the end user than it would be to just use the Settings menu in the first place. Now that said, are there anything in this Settings menu that give us more additional access? Maybe give us access to things that we don't have access through our configuration here? I don't think so. We have the same basic configuration settings that we have inside of our Windows settings. I mean, from a performance standpoint, we could turn on Superfetch, but I don't know why you'd want to do that. Not too many people are going to use HHDs. So in other words, you're not using spinning disks with Windows 11. The majority of people who are running Windows 11 are not running spinning disks. And the reason why is because Windows 11 technically only supports the 8th gen processor and newer. And by the time the 8th gen processor came out, even if you were running a bog stock i3 processor, there's a strong possibility it came with a smaller solid state drive. And if you did buy a machine with a spinning disk and say an i5 or an i3 and an 8th gen, then generally speaking, you're not upgrading to Windows 11 because chances are Windows 10 was a boat anchor to begin with. So there's really no additional usability that I could see in here that's going to be something that I would call helpful for even the most basic end user or home user. Okay, so let's click on our checkout revision. Now, keep in mind this machine has no internet access, so it's probably just going to launch a page. Yep. And with that, we're going to see specifically where it goes. So we just see that it goes to the ReviCC website, which if you want to check it out, you can go there on your own. It's not an infected website. Checked it out. Looks good. That said, we can see here we also have the Brave Firewall plus VPN. Again, if you're using a VPN on your browser on your home connection thinking you're secure, you're not secure. Don't waste your time. It's just drawing more attention to you. I don't see anything else in here from a configuration standpoint that would be questionable. It looks basically like it's trying to make things easy for an end user to use, But in reality, I don't see it as any easier than somebody that's gotten used to Windows 10 and is now on a Windows 11 operating system, how to actually navigate the settings menu. And for people that are technical, they generally don't use the GUI anyway. Everything is command line, and there's no reason to use the GUI. And quite frankly, if you use command line, the command line's really been the same command since like really Windows Vista. So between Vista and today, you've had decades of time to learn the operating system command line interface. And those commands still work between one operating system and the next. So Vista 7, 8, 8.1, 10, and now 11, all the commands inside your command line logic basically are the same. So I just don't understand the point of this additional software configuration. But with that said, let's do our traditional thing. Let's take a scan of the system as it sits out of the ISO file to see what it looks like from a security configuration. Okay, so generally we would now jump over into our system for our configuration for Nessus, where we would run our scan. But I want to touch base real quick about this thing called Playbook, and specifically why it is that I don't think that that's a good idea yet. So what we see on the screen here is that Google is now trying to block my ability to go to the website to get to the playbook. And the reason why is because the playbook itself, the file that it creates through this AME configuration, is actually a newer or changed version of a closed source application used to be created by Ansible for allowing you to control Unix and Linux-based systems. So in our Ansible configuration, we could create configurations inside of a database to point through our Ansible configuration for our playbook. So basically, the playbook is the ability to customize or migrate data or information in a Linux or Unix-based system. And that's what the playbook configuration is. Now, I take it that the new playbook configuration on this AME application for ReviOS, for instance, is a customization of Windows. But according to everything that I've read, the YAML file that they use is a closed source application that is purchased through Ansible for the sake of using the application. Now, with that said, as it's a closed source project, you have no access to the controller, the config file. So basically, you're installing a vanilla version of your Windows operating system on your internal infrastructure. Then you're using this playbook to modify your system with the AME application. So the AME application is supposed to be the controller that allows you to change certain controls or certain revisions to the operating system based off of the YAML script that is imported into the AME configuration. But since you have no access to the script, you don't actually know what's being installed or being migrated or changed in your system, outside of just what the GUI tells you is being changed. Now, the reason why this is an issue is because in the Ansible configuration, when you write this detail and data, you can install keyloggers, you can install remote access tools, you can install just about everything and anything through the playbook. And since you have no access to the playbook itself to read it, you have no access to the controls that are being installed on your system. So in order for me to install this on my infrastructure to test, I would never do it on anything that was any even shape of a LAN configuration. I would put a Windows 11 desktop on the outside of my firewall and probably hook it up into my failover internet connection, and then download the playbook onto it and run the scans on it for security purposes. So I'm not saying it's not something we can't do in the future, but right now, based off of all the data and the details I've been able to find for the actual playbook application, I would avoid that thing like the plague. I think you're just asking for problems. So without further digression, let's take a look at our security configuration as far as what the Nessus scan is saying. And then once we finish the Nessus scan, let's jump back over into our Wireshark configuration and take a look to see if there's any communication or anything being sent outbound, like a phone home or anything else from this ReviOS that we have running. So before we jump back into the Tenable Nessus scanner, let's take a look at the ReviCC website. And the reason why I bring this up is because if we go to the website, specifically they talk about performance, how the performance of the operating system is supposed to be better, how we're supposed to have more privacy, more stability, and then we have a community thriving to make this operating system better. But I'll be honest with you, so far I don't see any of this. From a performance standpoint, it's no faster than our out-of-the-box Windows 11 operating system. We have the Revi configuration tool that's built into it, but that particular configuration tool is a front end for something that already exists in your settings. Then we have a privacy configuration, but then we also have additional privacy turned off in our Windows firewall to allow us to get to our hotel websites, for instance, if we're using third-party applications. We're also not running any less backdoors as far as Cortana, Windows updates, all that other stuff. I don't see that as an actual fix, because if we're talking about privacy, then turning off Windows updates doesn't seem like a very good idea, because Windows updates fix bugs in the operating system. We don't have Cortana turned on, but you could do that out of the box. That's just during the installation process. And then once you get into it, you could easily just disable the service. It takes all of 30 seconds. So I don't see anything there. Now, as far as stability, again, I'm not seeing any speed increases here. I'm seeing the system as actually struggling and if not being slower. And then the collective about people behind it and working together, I'm sure there are. But let's take a look now at the Nessus scanner and see if there's any difference between this and a Windows 11 out-of-the-box system. So now that we're in a Nessus scanner, here is our Windows 11 out-of-the-box configuration. Now keep in mind, this particular Windows 11 out-of-the-box configuration does have the additional patch, the optional patch for the SMB configuration, which we have in one of our previous videos. I'll throw the link to that video in the description. But we have 40 infos on this particular system. On our Windows 11 no firewall, we don't have any other configurations. Let's take a look now to see if our Revi OS is better or worse. So if we jump in our configuration, so we have 39. Once we fix the 1, we would have 40, which means that this particular operating system has exactly the same security as an out-of-the-box vanilla Windows 11 system. It poses absolutely no benefit of running this operating system versus just running a vanilla Windows 11 system. If not, I'll go an additional step here and say that if the Windows firewall, not the Windows firewall, the Windows updates are disabled and we don't have additional tools in it, it's actually worse than the out-of-the-box Windows 11 system, because the out-of-the-box Windows 11 system has Microsoft Edge installed. It has the update configuration turned on. So those things will come back as negatives inside of your actual scan results. So in reality, if we have 39, we fix the 1 medium, which becomes an info again, so we're down to 40. So 40 to 40, this operating system has less running on it. The other operating system has more running on it. The OEM vanilla operating system has more running on it. But the OEM vanilla has the same amount of infos between the two systems. It tells me that this system is likely less secure, that there's probably security issues in the operating system that are coming up through the configuration here that we're not seeing. So let's jump back over to our Revi OS system. Okay, so we're back on the Revi OS. Let's take a look real quick at our Windows Update settings. So it appears they don't work. So we have no Windows security configuration of any kind on here, which tells me that the configuration's probably stopped on the actual operating system. I also have something bizarre going on up here, but I don't see any Windows configuration here as far as our security is concerned, which is concerning, because how are we going to get into our Windows Update configuration to figure out what's going on there? Let's take a look at the local group policy to see if there's anything funky on there with the Windows updates. Okay, so we have our group policy, our local policy configuration uploaded now, or updated here. Let's go into our Windows components and let's go to our Windows Update folder here and see if there's anything configured in any of this. All right, so we don't have anything there, but that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have it in the registry. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so what we got to do is we got to go to HKey local machine. Then we're going to go to software. Then we're going to go to policies, then to Microsoft, and to Windows, and then Windows Update, and then there's automatic updates under it. So if we go to Windows Update here, we can see that we do have registry modifications when it comes to actual Windows Update policy and configuration. So it was registry edited, not policy edited for the system. And generally, you do that when you use a script to do the installation process versus group policy configuration. Even though group policy controls the registry, So if you change it in either one of these places, it'll change this location, but it doesn't really matter. For the sake of this, it was registry modified. So let's take a look at our actual settings here then. So we have power management is set to off. We have branch readiness level is, I don't see a configuration necessarily on that. Oh, I have 14, so I have 20 day on that. I have defer Windows updates is set to yes. Defer update features in days is set to 365 days. Defer quality updates. Yeah, so we have deferral policy set up here. So basically the system's set to never run updates. It's set also to exclude the update drivers and quality updates, so we don't get driver updates either, which is not necessarily a bad thing. If you guys haven't catched it or caught it, check out my Windows 11 how to make Windows updates less annoying. You could go through all these settings and go into details as to how to configure them in the Pro system to make life a little easier to deal with. But for the sake of this machine, we don't have Windows updates enabled. We're set to configure updates to stop them from applying to the system. So that also lowers our security of our configuration on our Windows system. So from a security perspective, I don't think that this OS is secure. I think that this OS has issues. The configuration is not really good for any one person that wants to run this OS as a daily driver. It might be good for a media center because, again, that's what it looks like in the actual firewall configuration that it was configured for, was media center usage. But from a functional usability standpoint, I would say this is an operating system I would avoid, especially with that Playbook configuration, not knowing specifically what's in those scripts and not having access to it because of the closed source configuration files. I don't think I would touch this thing again with a 40-foot pole. But with that said, let's take a look on the Wireshark side and see from a config management, do we have anything phoning home from this operating system? Okay, so we've been running a capture for quite a while now, specifically for the particular IP address of 192.168.242.219, which is what we use as our standard IP address on our testing systems. If you don't know that by now, then welcome to the channel. But as we're running this, we're not seeing any traffic from that particular system. So as usual, I will run a ping from that particular system back over to our scan system here to make sure that we are actually getting traffic. And there we go. We do get our ICMP relays. So we are getting traffic, and there is traffic being captured for that particular IP address. There's just no noise from that particular IP address. So that's good news. So with that said, let's jump back over to that system, that Revi OS, and let's take a look at our listening ports to see what we have listening for inbound communication. Because obviously this is only going to capture communication that's either bidirectional or outbound or something that's trying to phone home. We would see that as well. But since we don't see that, we have to just assume at this point that we don't have anything that's trying to phone home. That said, let's take a look now at the particular operating system and check to see if we have anything funky listening. Okay, guys, so welcome back. We're back now over on our Revi OS. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look specifically at what we're listening on. And I ran through these things, and these all look like they're basically our configuration ports for just traditional Windows services. We have our dynamic port allocation here, which is common in our Windows 10 and 11 systems. And we have our port 135 and 445, which are also common ports. So these are things that are not out of the blue. But this right here is not a common port. Port 5040 is not a common port. So the first thing we did here is we took a look specifically at what 5040 was. And we could see that the process identifier is 1336. So if you were to jump back over to your task manager and we look at details and we find 1336, we'll find 1336 running here, 64-bit, right, service host. So we right-click on this thing and go to Properties, and we can go to Digital Signatures, and we'll notice that in our digital signature configuration here that we have a Microsoft signer. However, and bear with me here because now the thing is frozen while I hit the Details key. It comes back as a Windows publisher. Email address is not available. And we see it's a Microsoft timestamp service. We also see the publisher as Microsoft Windows Publisher. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because if we go to details here, we're going to see Microsoft Corporation, right? However, if we go over into here, specifically what we're going to look for is the Display Broker desktop service. Now, this operating system totes itself on being a secure operating system. However, this particular listening service is for an HDR configuration. So basically, what this configuration is for your wireless display connection. So you could broadcast your display wirelessly. Now, usually that's not a big deal if you have it configured for your home TV or your home TV service. But that's not a service that generally starts with Windows, which is why I said I have a feeling that this particular system is configured out of the box to be a media center system more so than a gaming system. Because generally speaking, you wouldn't want the Display Broker desktop service running on your system, allowing a remote connection of a monitor to connect to your system without you knowing that that service was running. So I would say at this point that that's not something that I would want running. Now, since we know what it is, we could actually go into this thing and go into the services itself and see the CDP SVC and right-click on this particular service and then go to services. And then we're going to have to find that service. We're going to look for specifically the CDP SVC service, this 1336. And likely we're going to find it yet. So here we go. This is going to be our CDP SVC. We're going to change this to disabled, apply, and then stop. Now, this service you can control inside of your controlled system services. So basically, when you go to your settings to add a TV, you could turn that service back on, but it's not on by default. Same thing we're going to notice here is that we have a user-controlled configuration setting for this, for the Unistack services. Again, this is another thing that you don't necessarily need enabled. So we could disable this, apply. So when you get that error message that the perimeter is incorrect, that means that the service was modified and installed on the system. So there's something else on the system that controls remote access into your configuration for your remote monitor, your HDR. And it could be a configuration that was done previously on whoever built the ISO file, but that's a security concern because we can't stop. I mean, we can stop it, but we can't set the service to disabled. So when you reboot this system, that service is going to be set to automatic, and likely that service is going to restart itself when you reboot the system. That tells me that there's something funky in the configuration of this thing that doesn't allow you to change the service control module for the particular service. All right, guys, so where does that leave us with this particular operating system? From a configuration standpoint, I see no benefit of running it. All you really do is you get a tool that gives you options to a menu that already exists in systems. Then from a firewall configuration standpoint, you have things opened in your firewall configuration that wouldn't normally be there by the vanilla version of Windows 11. It's a little slower, it's a little more buggy. You don't have access to the same consoles menu because somebody has removed the consoles menu from the actual operating system. But those are things that are important, right? Like Windows updates. Those are things that you should be running. It's not faster. It doesn't give you any additional driver packages for like your video cards or anything like that to run. It's really not that much smaller than your full-on build of 23H2. I mean, maybe like 6 gigs, but at that point, I mean, you know, your operating system isn't going to be the full disk anyway. And if you have a 20 gig hard drive that's from the factory, chances are it's too old and slow to be running this operating system anyway. So what is it used for? At this point, I don't understand what it would be used for. I understand that this may not be the full experience that the Playbook may offer, but I think you'd have to be crazy to run a Playbook that you have no access to the code on a system and then use that as your main daily driver, not knowing whether or not there's a keylogger installed on your system, because you have no access to the code to see what's actually being installed. So I'm not sure what the purpose of this operating system is. If somebody wants to throw some stuff in the comments and let me know if this is somehow modified from the version that you got on the Playbook, that would be interesting to hear. Because at least in what I see here, I don't see a purpose. It's slower than the vanilla version of Windows 11. It doesn't have any security that Windows 11 doesn't have built in out of the box. The security that it does have is actually the reverse of the security, allowing things through the firewall that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And I just don't see any bonus or benefit to running it. So I guess my recommendation on this operating system is feel free to run it. Just know that it's possible it could have keyloggers, crypto loggers, miners, and only God knows what else in it if you get it from the actual playbook, since you can't see the actual code. And if you get it in an ISO, then you're in a situation like I'm in here where you install it, and if this is how it's supposed to be out of the box with the configuration for remote HDR to allow people to remotely connect anonymously to your system to share your monitor, I would never run this, especially on something that's able to connect or has additional features to allow you to circumvent the firewall configuration settings at like a Marriott. I don't know what you would be thinking if you thought this was a good idea. I guess, yeah, leave me some comments. Let me know if this is different than what you guys see after the playbook install. Let me know if you guys have any tools that you've used so you can actually read the playbook code, because according to what I've read, the AME will not let you read the code. You could only read the configuration changes that the code says it does, but not the code itself. So yeah, definitely drop me some comments, guys. I'd really be interested in knowing if there's something other that I could read through so I could get the config file and the detailed information so we could actually attempt to do the playbook installation version of this operating system. Or I think there's another one called Athens OS or Atlas OS. That's another one I would love to check out in the playbook flavor, assuming I have access to the playbook. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for sticking around.